Back in our webinar series. I am here today. This is Sam Sikdar, and I'm here with
Lonnie Beck
and Chris Taylor.
So today we are talking about the 5 things every man and woman must know for self-defense. Guys, this is a very serious subject matter, but we're gonna try to, not get too bogged down in the gravity of it and pass along some good information. Our subtitle for this webinar is because at the end of the day, it's better to have and not need than to need and not have. The likelihood of you ever having to use physical self-defense is probably lower than other threats to your health and livelihood, like, for example, slip and fall, or getting in a motor vehicle accident, or being poisoned. Is more likely to kill you than physical predation. However, it's nice to be able to have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to defend yourself if needed. So with that, let's get started.
Let's do it. So as always, we'd like to thank you guys for hopping on. We saw that there was a few people that were actually on this thing before it even kicked off. So thank you guys. And if you're interested, just go on over and visit dragongym.com to see all the cool stuff that we got going on at our locations. And thanks again. Cool. You know, we're co-owners of the Dragon Gym. We have almost a century of combined experience. Between the three of us, we've taught thousands of students and had numerous private clients. And, you know, we sort of train the trainers now who are training people here at Dragon Gym. Between the three of us, we've tackled some pretty cool arts between Taekwondo, Hapkido. You know, I've been doing years of Muay Thai, and Chris and Sam have been doing a lot of Jiu-Jitsu, kettlebells. So we've sort of seen a lot of things and a lot of different philosophies and dogma, if you will.
That's right.
That surround self-defense. And we've sort of boiled it down to what we feel in our experience and our expertise works the best.
So a quick plug before we get into the details. Like Lonnie mentioned, we have sort of boiled down and taken the vital few techniques of 3 major martial arts, Hapkido, Muay Thai, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and come up with a course, a program, 8-week intensive training, 2 days a week. And the goal is by the end of the 8 weeks of training, you have some level of proficiency to defend yourself in a physical manner if needed. So if that's something you're interested in, we are going to open up registration. It's going to fill up quick, folks, later this week. If you want to get on that early notification list, please send me an email.
You know, it's a really great byproduct of this class too, is the fact that you're going to get in pretty damn good shape.
Yeah. There will be a great side effect of moving around a lot. So before we get into the 5 things everyone has to know, I started with number 0 as,
I thought that was a typo.
It was not.
Okay.
Right. So there's 5 things, but 0 comes before 1. So before we can even start counting, the mindset stuff has to be addressed. So I have a couple points on that, a couple quotes. 2 is 1, 1 is none. So this idea of redundancy, I don't know where that originates from, but a very good friend of mine uses this quote all the time. And, to give some context, he was embedded in Iraq for several years. So
I know this friend you're talking about.
This was very important sort of philosophy for him to have. So 2 is 1, 1 is none. The idea is, if we have 2 things to take care of one solution, if one fails, I have a backup. Chris, do you want to talk about this idea of the 2 types of violence?
Yeah, so we have social and asocial violence. Okay, and this is really, in a way, you can think of it more along the lines of like a National Geographic episode, and you can think of prey and predation and all that sort of thing. Whereas the people that are the actors that are doing these sorts of things to people would be the predators, and the people that are being preyed on are the prey. So when they assess their prey, they're not looking for the most fair fight. They're not looking for the most quintessential like a karate movie fight. They're looking for somebody that is weaker and slower and not paying attention and is easy prey. Just like when you watch these shows, the the lion attacks the not the strongest wildebeest that would give it a fair fight. They attack the sick one or the weak one or the baby. All right. So we need to find ways to prevent ourselves from being that prey. Right. And a lot of this comes down to our attention to what's going on around us, or situational awareness. So can these things be de-escalated? Sometimes not. Like if you're in a bar setting and somebody's, giving you a hard time because they don't like your haircut or whatever, yeah, maybe. But if somebody is really choosing to pick on you, to prey upon you, sometimes de-escalation is not always possible.
That really comes down to that, that social violence is, here you have listed rules versus no rules. When we're talking about that asocial violence, it's almost like that person doesn't recognize you as the same species. It's like they don't see a human in front of them. But when we talk about like social violence, I don't know why you said somebody approaches you in a bar and says, "Nice haircut. Why'd you look at me?"
Because you have nice
Is, that's sort of like the college kid fight where, listen, we are going to get in a fight. But even as we're doing that, there's a set of rules. There's a set of guidelines. Like, I'm not going to curb you. I'm not going to, hit you after you're knocked out. There are a set of rules. But
the ultimate thing is that they see each other as individuals.
Right.
They're like combatants, but they're individuals. Whereas
Correct.
this asocial predation is the person sees the prey as not
correct
a person.
Yep.
Less than them. I mean, you've probably seen interviews and TV shows and stuff about serial killers. Like, they just don't really care.
Nope.
Well, the way I think about it, at least, is like food, right? So it's like we all have a certain morality about killing, but unless you're a vegetarian or a vegan,
you're not doing anything about it.
You don't think the same thing about killing your food,
right?
And I think that's a real clear difference between social and asocial violence. When somebody is in that asocial mode, they see you as food.
Yeah.
Not as an equal in any shape or form. The next point about self-defense on the mindset end is this, and I don't think we can emphasize it enough. Self-defense is a process, not an event.
Okay, so I've been seeing this pop up a lot in the the language that you've been using when we're marketing this and we're talking about this. And it's not an event. It's not something that you can go to. Listen, we do one-day self-defense workshops with the intention to show people that you need to train in order to be able to be proficient at having some level of self-defense, defend yourself. They're not an opportunity for you to go in and say, I've trained 2 hours. I have 6 techniques under my belt. I'm good for 6 weeks. If anybody attacks me in the next 6 weeks, I got you. After that, I'll have to do another one-off self-defense seminar. That concept is what people actually think when they go and they do self-defense workshops. And it's pretty evident when they don't sign up for a long-term program. So it's something that you have to, we have, muscle memory systems. You need 1,000 slow reps in order to do something proficiently, not even considering that you're going to have an adrenaline dump and you're going to be anxious and nervous. And so the process is you got to train, man. You got to train a lot, often.
I think there's 2 paradigms that we can look at this statement. One is, like you said, is the, from the paradigm of training is, training is not an event. The 3 of us, I think, are practicing the same techniques that we learned 30 years ago, give or take, because ultimately there's no such thing as advanced techniques in martial arts.
No.
Really. It's really just experts are better at the basics.
Correct.
Right. The other paradigm to look at this statement is self-defense is a process and not an event, in the sense there may be an event where you have to use self-defense in some way, right? But your ability to defend yourself, furthermore, your ability to not need to defend yourself, is a process. So the process of self-defense is not just that I'm training an hour a day, 3 to 5 days per week. The process of self-defense is, what do I do from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed every day? What are the things that I'm putting in place and the routines that I'm following to ensure that I'm safe, my family members are safe, my household is safe, my business is safe.
It's your
So
dedication to that being vigilant.
yeah,
right?
so think of, self-defense is not just knowing how to stop somebody from punching you in the face or tackling you or mugging you, but it's also, is there a way to make sure that all my doors and windows are locked every single day when I leave the house? Is there a way to make sure that there's no blind spots
Mhm.
uh, around my property when I'm driving a vehicle, when I'm entering and leaving a particular place? That is the process of self-defense beyond just the event of needing to block strike.
Yeah. It's like a fire prevention, right? If you need to put out a fire in your house, you've messed up somehow. Probably it could have been an error on your part, or it could have been just a freak accident. But generally, we try to prevent accidents. We try to keep our electrical wiring up to code. We try to make sure we're not setting up stove fires and things like that. And then we have things like fire extinguishers on hand. We can look at the martial arts as our fire extinguisher for the ultimate event. But it's a still process.
Right. Next points. This idea of consistency. What is consistency when it comes to self-defense?
Well, you asking me?
I'm asking.
You're asking. Well, consistency with anything is doing the things that you know that you have to, even when you may not want to. Showing up to class on a Tuesday night when you've had a really long day, because consistency trumps talent. Consistency trumps ability. If you have somebody that's talented, they're gonna rest back on that talent and think that they don't need to come to classes often. But if you get that one dedicated person that might be physically, you know, unable to do the things that everybody else in class is doing, but they're training all the time, that consistency is gonna play through, create, you know, what's the word that you always use? Competency.
Competence. I love competence.
Yes. Now, the other one is the willingness and ability to commit violence, which is a huge line in the sand for a lot of people.
What do you think, Chris?
I think everybody's capable of it, but I think everyone has different belief structures and different lives and different everything. And I think it's something that a lot of people have perhaps not even considered before. I think that a lot of people have never really, they think about self defense, they think about, oh, I'm going to punch somebody in the face, but they may not have thought about really what that entails. So I think the first step is to understand how far you are willing to go as a person. All right. Am I willing to hit somebody? Am I willing to cause greater physical harm to someone? All right. Am I able to, uh, live with the repercussions of using my killer instinct? I think we all have this, and I think we all have barriers to it. And I think we need to do a little reflection on that first.
Well, I can say that I've seen both of you. Should I say this? Actually, commit physical violence in self defense situations to people, and I can tell you that you guys don't have that trigger that stops you from doing it. I always have, which is why it was, in a physical altercation when we were in college, or you're being peacocked on the streets of Westchester, or somebody's pressing up a little bit too close to one of your friends. Is I've always had that tough time to be able to go through and actually put my hands on somebody. It's not saying I've never done it, but it was always something for me. I mean, it's just the difference in the three of our personalities. But when the fire gets hot, you have to be willing to pull that trigger.
I think to go along with what you're saying is uh, a couple years ago I developed a training program, private training program, and we nicknamed it Long Fuse Training.
Yes,
right? And the idea of that was, the person I was specifically training with this program was kind of a hothead. He had a temper and sort of relied on that enthusiasm to get himself through situations. And the sort of idea of the training was, what? We're not going to rely on enthusiasm alone. We're going to rely on skill and ability.
Mm-hmm.
And that enables you, because you have that confidence of, I have such a big bomb at the end of this fuse.
That's what it was. Long fuse, big bomb, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
That you can have more calm, more patience, more perspective on every situation. Is like, yes, you can be very willing and very able to commit violence when needed. But that is also the beauty of martial arts training and self-defense training specifically, is it enables that fuse to be longer and longer and longer.
Of course.
Right. Um, Part of the reason we put this slide in is there's a lot of social conditioning that we all are a part of, right? Men or women, in the sort of roles that we are meant to follow. And part of that social conditioning is not immediately turning every altercation into a violent altercation. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. But the consequence and side effect of that social conditioning is when we do need to use violence, because we're going back to these situations where the person we're dealing with is not a party to the same social conditioning that we are.
Right.
So that is what we're getting at, is the willingness and ability to commit violence is, number one, understanding we're only going to do that when there is no other way. So there's a quote, is violence is not always the answer, but when it is the answer, it's the only answer.
Yep.
Right. So that is another way to think of it. And the other is really recognizing your own self-worth, your own value as a person, and being confident in that. Is you do not have to be a victim, and recognizing that self-worth also helps fuel this willingness and ability.
So considering that, this idea of developing tenacity is, training is hard. It is adversity. This is where you're supposed to be put under pressure. This is where you're supposed to have your feet held to the fire. And those people that do have the ability to act with some level of violence, I think for the people that have a hard time doing, or the people that haven't done in the past, think that they do that with an asocial mindset. No, they're nervous. Their adrenaline's going. Their blood pressure is up. That's just a natural human condition when a physical altercation goes down. But if you've developed that tenacity through hard training in a controlled, safe environment, then you're going to have, steps 1 through 3. But it's, the stress, the anxiety, the adrenaline is all still going to be there. And you have to learn how to operate under that stress, because, that's when that lizard brain starts to kick in, and you either freeze. What's the other one? It's fight, flight, and freeze, right? So you sort of just stop in your tracks, which could possibly be the worst thing to do.
Yeah.
Developing some sort of resolve, a willingness to act decisively on your convictions. And, we see that a lot of the times, especially in a violent social situation, where they really believe that this person is crossing a line, but they're not doing anything about it. They're not being decisive, which is, if I refer back to the situations that I was talking about, both of you guys, it was that person clearly crossed a value that you had drawn, and you had no problem stepping over and taking care of the situation. So, that willingness to act decisively was clearly, trained in you well. You want to go on calmness, Chris? Because I do believe that I've seen you act extremely calm when stuff like this happens.
Yeah, I mean, it always reminds me of Brian Petty.
Yeah.
He used to make he always used to tell us to never make a face when you're training, right? And there's a myriad of different reasons, mostly in a competitive format. The person gets some sort of insight into how you're feeling, right? But that has stuck with me throughout the ages. So that no reaction sort of mentality is what I strive for when I'm training jujitsu and sparring and all this stuff. But I think a lot of that transcends just being on the mat and moves into the world of self-defense as well. One thing I've heard from a lot of people that have been in altercations and used various forms of self-defense is that they said that it didn't seem quite as hard as they thought it would have been in comparison to routine training. Meaning, which tells me a lot. It tells me that they trained hard. It means that they worked hard, they paid their dues, and when the time came and it was called upon to use their techniques, they were able to be calm because, like Sam was saying earlier, there was that big bomb at the end, and they were able to pick and choose and do what was appropriate and move the way they need to move without, relying on adrenaline, even though they there was quite a adrenaline spike, I'm sure, but they weren't freaking out.
Right.
Okay, now we're getting to it.
Here we go. Number one.
Number one. That was all zero. Number one, make yourself a hard target. So, how would you define a hard target, Chris?
So hard target would be that I made the analogy of the National Geographic show. That would be the biggest, toughest, bullest antelope or elk or whatever the prey would be. And why is that the hardest target? Because they are ready, willing, and able to put up a fight, and not just for themselves, but for the rest of their people, rest of their herd. So if you can harden your target, that means not only yourself physically, your awareness, but your home, your actions to and from home, to and from work, your actions on benefit of other people. So if you're trying to protect yourself, part of that is helping protect people that live in your house, people that you work with, just generally making you less prey-like. So we're talking, I think the number one is probably situational awareness. So there's what you call a color code, it's just referenced somewhere. But if you look at it like this, where the color white is you're not paying attention to what you're doing. You're in your phone, you're talking on the phone, you're spaced out, you have no situational awareness. Okay, you have no awareness of people coming and going around you and at all what's happening near you. If you move to yellow, there's a potential threat. Red is, or orange is a likely threat, and then red is that happening, so to speak.
It's
Imminent threat. Yeah. Well, it is occurring. Right. So if you live in that orange and yellow zone, you will be at your peak situational awareness, but you will also be very unhealthy. You can't live your life like that. So you have to know when to turn it on and when to turn it off, and you have to be fluid in that. So there's a few things we can do to kind of minimize that, avoid distractions. A lot of people I see walking around the city with like headphones on all the time. That really blows my mind. It probably would help, being in the city and hearing all that noise and stuff, but it's really not a good thing for you, even just for general safety.
Well, not just headphones, but head down in their phone.
Oh yeah, maybe even
like
worse.
noise canceling headphones.
Uh-huh.
So even
Yeah.
if there's an emergency around this person, they're probably not going to be aware of what's going on.
Yep. Trying to keep at least one hand free. So I have this obsession. Like I do a lot of grocery shopping for the family, but I have this obsession with carrying things in one trip, which I think pretty much every man in America that does grocery shopping wants to carry all of the groceries from the car to the house in one trip. Right?
Wait, you can take more than one trip?
No, I didn't know.
I didn't know you could.
What?
Exactly. So that means that my left hand basically is almost, the blood is cut off because I have so much weight and bag and all that stuff in one hand because I refuse to use both hands when I'm going from the store to the car. Why? Because if I have to drop my groceries, I only have to drop them out of one hand. I have one hand that's available for whatever I need to, and it's generally my dominant hand.
Yeah.
So if you're carrying your phone or your laptop or bag or whatever it is, at least try to keep one hand free at all times. And if you need to make two trips, look, guys, maybe you need to make two trips.
So let's really quick, if you guys don't mind avoiding blind spots. I was walking through Whole Foods the other day and I saw a lady walking towards me with her nose in her phone. And I said, let me just maintain this line of walk. So I was on the line and I stepped out of the way immediately as she passed me. Had I not stepped out of the way,
No idea.
she would have run directly into me. She wasn't carrying any bags. She didn't have a cart with
Yeah.
her. So, I was being a nice guy moving out of the way. I didn't say anything to her. But listen, that's like 50% of the people walking around, especially at this time of the
So this idea of making yourself a hard target is kind of a play on words too. So making yourself a hard target is like literally harden yourself.
Yeah.
Right. And your home, your car, your situation. But also think of it this way: is like hard is sometimes a synonym for difficult. Make yourself a difficult target. Make it difficult for someone to choose you
Right.
as their prey.
Yeah, if they're gonna get me, they're gonna have to pack a lunch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they're going to come after me before they come after you, which is one of the things that has helped me out is eye contact.
Oh
Is looking directly at people that I think are a threat, is maintaining eye contact with them, letting them know that I see you, I know you see me, and I'm not breaking it. So even for, for smaller people, for women, for whoever it might be, eye contact is an insanely powerful thing.
Yeah, and there's little subtleties that go along with that. So like we live in the Northeast, so that like, what's up, or like, hey, how you doing? That kind of thing is really,
Right.
how we greet one another,
Mm.
especially in that sort of situation. So when you respond or when you initiate the response, like you have done something, you have seized control of the situation. If the person is potentially, prospecting you, if you let them, seize initiative, you've given them opportunity. But if you seize the initiative by initiating, like, hey, how's it going, man? Right, you can also get some sort of response from them too.
Right.
So if they respond like, oh, hey man, how's it going? And you set them back a little bit, you get them off, they realize that you're outgoing
Mhm.
and that you're expressing yourself. It makes them realize that perhaps you are a bit more of a harder target.
I think we get to it later. There is a stage in the process of attack, which is literally called interview.
Yes.
And this is what's happening is they are interviewing you and, deciding, are you going to be a good target,
Right.
an easy target?
Yeah.
And how you answer that interview question early makes all the difference.
Yep.
So listen, whenever we're listening to things or imagining the scenario, people are putting an illustration together in their mind, right? So like I see a physical image of what we're talking about. I think when people imagine this, they think about it the wrong way. They think about it, it's on a dark street, or it's in an alley, or it's somewhere dimly lit where you're sort of by yourself. This could be Giant. This could be Whole Foods. This could be any of these places. So take that mental picture and start to switch it to, this person interviewing you is, somebody walking in Sports Authority. Oh wait, Sports Authority's closed. What's the new place? Home Sense, right? This can happen just about anywhere.
What is Home Sense?
It's another TJ Maxx company. That's the same thing as Home Goods, but more expensive.
Interesting. Interesting. That brings us to situational awareness. And bluntly put, it is pay attention.
Please pay attention.
So let's talk about that a little bit.
So considering your surroundings, who's around, what's normal, where are the exits, does anyone or anything seem out of place? Okay, so a couple weeks ago, my wife and I were in the airport. We had like a 5 a.m. flight. I don't know why she does that. 5 a.m. flight out of Newark. We're in the airport at 3 a.m. We're going through the check-in line, and this gentleman walks up sort of alongside of what the line is, and he's acting extremely strange. Really, I couldn't see his hands. He was staring at the wall. Every time he looked at me, he broke eye contact. So I started to sort of go through this. We didn't touch on it, the OODA loop, which was on the last slide.
Mm-hmm.
As I observed what was happening, I oriented myself. I made my wife take the stroller and go all the way to the kiosk. And then I gave the lady that was in front of me who had a baby a heads up as well, and I made her walk away. Turned out to be nothing. But my adrenaline was going. My senses were heightened. I was hyper vigilant, and I went through that loop, and it helped me really understand what was happening, and it got me prepared for if something happens again. But I was tired. We had just had a 2.5 hour car ride. I hadn't slept. So it was very easy for me to just put my head down, which what most people did, and they didn't see this potential threat happening around them. So, always know what's around, what's normal, what seems out of place, and where, like, if something goes down, how are you going to get out?
Well, I think there's an important lesson there is, call it your spidey sense or whatever, your fear. There's a reason we have those sort of intuitions. And again, with social conditioning, also just complacency, because, our day-to-day lives are relatively easy.
Pretty threatless.
So when those things come up, it's easy to say, oh, it's nothing, and rationalize it away. But ultimately, you take a few steps, everybody's safe, and then nothing happened.
Right.
Okay. Move on, get on your plane,
Yeah.
and do your business. So part of the situational awareness is letting your brain listen to what your senses are telling you.
And a level of communication with your spouse and your loved ones is really, really important. You guys both know my wife. She's very opinionated. She's very hard-headed. And a lot of the times if I give suggestions, Yeah, most of the time she listens to him, probably not. But she knows that when we're in a situation like that, and I give her this particular look or cue, that it's business, and it's important to have that communication with the people around you, just in case something like that happens. So they know that you're, one, not joking around, and two, that the situation is serious.
So situational awareness is a skill that can be developed. So it's, the three of us are quote unquote highly trained individuals. So it may sound like, oh, well, that's something that's just comes natural. But it is something that can be developed, and specifically so, even outside of physical self-defense or martial arts training, is start to have, it goes back to the idea, this is a process. Start to practice being situationally aware. So how do you do that? Every time you go somewhere, go through a checklist, right? What it would be in that checklist? Where are the exits?
Mhm.
Where are the possible ways for people to come into this facility? Where are the possible ways for me to leave?
Right.
Or is my back to any entry points?
Mhm.
Do I have any blind spots? If I were to need to get up and, hey, forget about self-defense. What if there was just a fire?
Yeah.
Right? If I needed to get up and escape the room quickly, how would I do it? And in the beginning, it will feel strange and it will be an awkward process to go through. But over time, it will start to become automatic, right? You can do that with other things, is like, let's say you go to a place regularly. Start to look for things that are different, because we have this sort of blindness. Oh, it's the same, it's the same, it's the same. Start training yourself to see differences. Then you'll find one, then you'll find two, and then all of a sudden you'll start to find 10 things that are different from day one to day two.
So you referenced the OODA loop just for awareness. It was a device of John Boyd or Colonel John Boyd. It is observe, orient, decide, act, and that happens on the micro and on the macro. So whether you're making a decision of what to have for lunch or the millisecond of how to respond to an attack, you are always going through these processes, these steps. All right. So the more frequently you do something, the shorter and more compact that time frame becomes. So that goes back to our constant practice reference. Right. So constantly practicing, we're shortening OODA loop times for responses in dangerous situations.
So point three. So now we're starting to get a little deeper into it. So we've touched on some of these ideas, but the precursors for attack, right? So now we're saying awareness and hopefully prevention of some sort of physical incident happening, right? There's this idea that body language betrays our thoughts, meaning uh, reading somebody's body language will tell you what they're thinking before they act or say anything, right? So here are some things to look for. So we talked about eye contact, but inappropriate eye contact is a good indication. Lonnie, you mentioned nervousness, awkward smiling, and then repeated verbal contact. So, what would be an example of inappropriate eye contact?
Held gaze or broken gaze at weird intervals. Like if you're walking down the street and somebody looks at you and you make eye contact with somebody, to keep and stare them down as you're passing them, that's fairly abnormal. Uh, just as if you're talking with somebody and they keep breaking eye contact, if they're asking what time it is and they keep shifting away from you, that's also somewhat abnormal. And that's also something that could be, while not in and of itself a red flag, it is one of those markers that adds up to you know leveling you up in that color code.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? Repeated verbal contact.
Well, if a guy comes up to you and goes, "Hey man, what time is it?"
Mhm.
Right, and then a couple of seconds later, like they break contact and they come back and say, "Hey man, you got smoke?" Or, "Hey man, where's this train going?"
Yeah.
And just weird, like that's not really very normal.
Right.
If you're going to start up a conversation with a person on a plane, it's like, "Oh, where are you going?" And there's just a different feel, and like the initiations seem more natural. Like we've been speaking with other humans all of our lives, so
Right.
it should feel natural. And if it feels unnatural or forced or something, there could be, that could be a
They're
marker.
trying to re-engage the
Yeah.
conversation when there's no reason to.
Yeah. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, so we did mention this before as well. So all violent attacks go through these 5 steps: intent, interview, positioning, attack, and reaction. Right. So number one, they're establishing the intent to take something from you. It might be a belonging, it might be your health, it might be your life, right? And then they're going to go through this interview process. So the interview is, it's not a job interview where somebody's, hey, what's your greatest strength,
Right.
right? It is, they are sizing you up,
Mhm.
so to speak, up and down, right?
Could
So,
be a verbal or nonverbal interview as well.
correct, correct. A lot of it will start out as nonverbal. If they pass, or if you pass, I guess, or fail, I don't know how you would think of it, but if you get through the interview process, then they're going to start positioning. So the positioning is, okay, now we know this is a predator prey situation, right? So how does a predator position themselves to be optimal for attack, right? Are they trying to isolate you in some way? Are they trying to cut off your path? Are they backing you into a corner? Are they invading your personal space? Um, then the attack itself, right? Whether it's putting their hands on you or grabbing you or pushing you or punching you. And then there's this part that doesn't get talked about a lot, is the reaction to the attack, right? So there's something the predator thought they were going to get out of attacking you. And depending on what the actual result was, will uh, influence how they react. So, for example, a very serious example is typically in the cases of sexual assault, the physical assault happens after the sexual assault.
Right.
So much so that the victim may even be murdered.
Right.
Right. Because it was not about the sex. They thought they were going to get something else out of it.
Right.
Right. So it's important to keep that in mind when we're talking about strategies for defending yourself. If you get as far as the attack, it's not enough to just stop the attack.
Right.
You have to go beyond and understand that there's going to be a reaction phase, and you have to be safe beyond that phase as well.
Which takes us to number 4. How far will you go and how far can you go? So a lot of people stop for a few different reasons. Those people that might be willing to use violence, oftentimes, and I'll use the case of children that are reacting to like a physical altercation or a bully, is that I've talked to many, many kids whose parents have told me that the reason they didn't do anything against the bully is because they were afraid to get in trouble by the principal, by their parents, by whoever it might be.
Yeah, and we know when they actually do something, they do get in trouble.
It doesn't matter. It's
Yeah.
it's a no fight policy. It's a no physical harm policy. Both parties are going to get in trouble, and that could be the case in a scenario with an adult as well. You might have this long drawn out case where the police don't know who did what. You might have some witnesses. Things are going to get dirty, but that doesn't matter. Is what's in front of you at the moment is the fact that you need to make sure that you and or your loved ones are safe. So how far are you really willing to go when something like that does happen? If we've gotten through that interview phase, if they've gotten through positioning and the attack is imminent and it's actually happening, what's happening? And how far can you go? What is the law? What does the law allow for you in self-defense situations? Are you going to get arrested? Are you going to get, tried for a crime? Who knows? So I guess that brings us to sort of some laws of.
Yeah, and look, let's preface: none of us are professional law enforcement or officers of the court.
Right.
So this is more of just to like give you an idea of what you need to learn about in terms of defending yourself. Chris, do you want to speak on some of this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, law enforcement is kind of relegated to using the force continuum, meaning that if it's verbal, it's verbal. If it's hands on, then they're hands on. Then they use this, then this, then this, then this. And your regular citizen just minding their business does not necessarily have to adhere to that. Though ethically, there is um, there is a little bit of a parallel to it. So, for example, if somebody is in that interview state, you can't flying sidekick them in the face because it's not justifiable.
Darn it.
right? So you basically have to be able to articulate to maintain yourself, your freedom, and so on. You have to articulate that you were, able to prove that this person had the means, the ability, and the intent to do you physical harm.
Right.
So if they're just interviewing you, they have not really expressed any of those three. Whereas if they're standing over top of you with a tire iron, telling you that they're going to kill you, and they're, raising their hand back and they're about to strike you, that's a different story. That
Right.
demonstrates all three of those things. So with you have castle doctrine listed here, but this is a state thing. So
Mm.
if I don't know if there's anybody listening from out of state, we're in Pennsylvania. Um, different states have different rules, so you'll be sure to look this up.
Some states not adopt the castle doctrine.
Well, I don't know. I know Pennsylvania fairly well, but again, I'm not a lawyer. So you want to look into your state if you're not in our state. If you're in our state, you basically, the way it's written in a synopsis is that you're allowed to defend yourself if you can prove those three things: means, ability, and intent, in any way that you're legally able to be. For example, a public street, or walking down the sidewalk or something like that, your place of business, um, along those lines, or your dwelling. So,
How would you prove intent?
well, it would be very situationally dependent.
Okay.
If they have all three of those things, it's very clear, probably cut and dry. If they have two of three of those things, then it can be, well, that's why we have court systems, because
Right.
then it has to be kind of hashed out. If somebody is menacing you, if somebody is in your house and they have a knife, right, but they haven't said a word to you, there's no reason to assume that they wouldn't be there to hurt you.
Mhm.
Like especially if they forced their way in.
Right.
And then so a forced entry is kind
Crime
of
in itself.
describes
Yeah.
intent, right? But I mean, there's been cases in case law that show people have forced their way in, and they're drunk or something, and they've broken into the wrong house to sleep on the couch. So there's a lot of gray area. So when it comes to law, you have to know this stuff for yourself. But generally speaking, going back to that intuition, you will know when somebody is really trying to hurt you. You get a sense. And you guys have all, I mean, the three of us, we've all been sparring and fighting and all this stuff. And when somebody's really trying to hurt you,
Yeah.
versus somebody that's just messing with
The,
you. they're just
the, the
sparring.
ethos changes.
Yeah.
Everything in
Yeah.
the air really switches, and you can feel it. Your blood pressure, like it's that gut response that you guys were talking about
Yeah.
earlier.
Yeah. You definitely know this. And to say that, I mean, I'm sure that there have been cases where people have proven, means, ability, and intent, and it's not necessarily been the case. Generally speaking, self-defense law is pretty well written. It keeps people from unethically injuring people that don't need to be injured, and it keeps people that need to be
Mhm.
kept safe.
So number 5 on the home stretch, last lap here. Number 5 is emphasizing again that everybody knows or must know that you have to make it a process. And the process is sort of building one tier on top of a foundation, right? And that foundation starts with, what we're doing today, knowledge and understanding of what violence and predation is and the different types of it, and understanding of what we need to do to address it. Then build on top of that is this idea of walking away and eliminating the risks in your life. Then on top of that is, okay, there are certain unavoidable risks that we have. How can I create habits to ensure my safety? On top of that, awareness. We talked about developing situational awareness, thinking of awareness as a skill that one can be developed, but also can decay. So maintaining it, right? Maneuvering and positioning, right? So we're a little bit farther down the chain, right? The interview has occurred, and now positioning. Am I positioning myself in a safe way, or am I getting myself into more trouble? Okay, now I'm stuck. Is really understanding my self-worth and understanding that it what is the value of yourself as a person, and not to be a victim. Verbal boundary enforcement. This can be very effective.
Mhm.
This can be very effective, is starting there. And then finally, that just small little tip of the pyramid is physical, the actual physical self-defense, where I think people want to jump to the top
All the way. Yeah.
before going through all of these precursor steps. So part of making it a process, again, all of this is connected from 0 to number 5. You hear some recurring themes because none of these things like uh, work in isolation, right? They all have to be part of a larger package of self-defense. So typically we think about people's response, adrenal response, as fight or flight. But the reality is there are 3 responses: fight, flight, or freeze. And most people fall into that freeze response category.
Yep.
You know,
They're paralyzed by a situation. They're astonished that something like this would happen. And I've actually seen when people freeze, they fall down. Have you ever seen this?
mm-hmm.
You know, people, whether it's, you know, being scared in a haunted house at Halloween or being, you know, pressed on by somebody at a bar or a street, and they actually drop all the way down to the ground. And it's like their whole body just sort of gives out, which is the absolute worst thing that can happen.
Yeah.
You know, listen, you fight, you're in the mix. We're going toe to toe. If it's mano a mano, I'm going to rest on my skills and the things that I've trained on. If I run, hey, I have the potential of escaping and getting out of harm's way. But if you freeze, a person has essentially carte blanche to do whatever the heck they want to do,
Yeah.
whatever their intention was. You just made it easier.
I think there's actually 4. The 4th one is posture, which comes into it, but that's strategic. Freeze is, you know, a reflection of that OODA loop, right? That's analysis paralysis. This is especially relevant for people that have learned a move or something, you know,
Or
like,
more than one move, and they're going through them trying to
Right.
remember what they are.
right.
Right.
A lot of this stuff is mental. Like in their head, their head is spinning, but their body's not doing anything. You know, so we need to ingrain this movement. We need to build these neural pathways to make this fight something that happens instinctively, or flight, or, you know, whatever the response.
Can
Yeah.
you be trained out of freeze?
Yes, most certainly can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's promising.
So we talked about this idea of 2 paradigms of process early on. One is sort of like the process of my life and my day, and then the other is the process of training. Process of training includes regular practice. Uh, Regular practice should include the following, right? Making space and defending your zone. How to strike effectively, uh, using your legs, moving around on the ground, specifically if you find yourself on your back.
Mm-hmm.
How to break someone's grip when they put their hands on you, and the clinch. How to effectively control someone else's movement. So you can see, well, at least to us, it's clear. Maybe we should explain, like, sort of each of these things has a flavor from the martial arts that we teach, right? So striking effectively, uh, I'm going to defer to the Muay Thai expert.
So, for anyone that's ever closed fist punched someone or something, you're made quickly aware of how brittle your hand is. I want to use this analogy of like taking your hand and punching a bowling ball. Like it's something that we would never do, but the skull in certain parts are just as hard as a bowling ball. And we have these little tiny bones in our hands, so they will break. It does hurt. And there's the risk that you run that now you're just going to make this person pissed off. You're not going to hit in the right spot. You're going to injure yourself, and you're going to level up their anger. So, you know, using what strikes are most effective for people, learning how to use elbows, learning how to create distance and make space so that you can, if we're going to strike, to use the hardest part of my weapon against the softest part of their body.
Using your legs, I think it's something we take for granted, is the power, control, and dexterity we have with our legs. Like regular common human behavior, you don't use your legs for much more than walking or running, right? Is, you know, driving, I use my hands. Typing, I use my hands. Writing, I use my hands. Cooking, I use my hands. Phoning, you use your hands and fingers. So we have this sort of natural dexterity in our hands and upper body that allows us to get away with being upper body dominant.
Right.
But the legs, they're longer, they're stronger, and they're more equal across the sexes, right? So typically, female legs versus a male legs, maybe 90% of the strength,
Mhm.
right? Upper body,
Different.
50%
Different.
at best. So if we know how to use our legs, one, it sort of balances the playing field a little bit between the strength of a man and strength of a woman, physical strength. And also it enhances the abilities we have, right? So if I hit you with my arm, it's annoying.
Right.
But if I know how to use my legs to generate power in a strike, whether it's with my legs or my arms or my elbows or my shoulder, it will be much more effective.
It's
Right?
devastating.
And then also, of course, we can use the legs for uh, grappling as well, and that plays into how do we move around on the ground, especially if you find yourself on your back.
Right.
Yeah, there's a few techniques that are, you know, very important in jiu-jitsu or wrestling that, you know, wrestlers and jiu-jitsu guys know very, very well, but a lot of people have a hard time picking up right off, like, you know, the hip escape and the bridge and all that stuff. You learn to make a little bit of space with your movement, then you can start to affect escapes and techniques like that, which, you know, kind of ties into the making space and defending your zone. That's both standing and on the ground,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and then grip breaking. So this is really important because a lot of control comes from people's grip on your body, whether it's on your actual physical body or on your clothing. Learning how to break free from that is really important. And jiu-jitsu is something we do all the time. We wear heavyweight gis, all right, and we're thrown around with them all the time. And one of the biggest things you can do is prevent that throw by breaking somebody's grip and their ability to control you.
Mhm. Now the last one of that is like, this is the scenario where now bodies have collided, and it's in martial arts it's generally called the clinch. It's where we're sort of hugging, for lack of better words. You see boxers do it, and that's when they rest. You see Thai boxers doing it, and that's where they work. Same with jujitsu guys as well. But if you don't know how to clinch the right way, then this person's going to be able to control you. But if you understand some of the fundamentals of like being able to control the head, being able to control the hips, now you can neutralize their attack and even be able to throw some really effective, devastating strikes, sweeps, to give yourself an opportunity to either fight more if you need to or get the heck out of there if you can.
So what does this all go down to? So part of the pitch of this presentation was, we were going to answer the question. So I want to learn self-defense. What's the best martial art for me to study?
You need to study that one where they knock people out through the sheet, because apparently that's, yeah, right. Using your chi. Listen, it doesn't matter. What's that old saying? It's not the song, it's the singer, right? You need to have the ability to sort of pull from a bunch of different ones. And in our experience, we found that combining some level of like, standing grappling with hapkido and, the ground game with Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and then learning how to be able to effectively strike and well round everything out with some type of Muay Thai kickboxing. A combination of all those things is really going to be the best way to make sure that you have all of the tools in the toolbox.
It's, if somebody puts their hands on you, we want you to be able to deal with it. Somebody tries to hit you, we want you to be able to deal with it. If you find yourself on the ground, we want you to be able to deal with it. Right. And the converse of that is if you need to hit someone, we want you to be able to do it very, very well. Right. If you need to put your hands on someone to control them, we want you to do it very, very well. If you need to take somebody down to the ground, we want you to be able to do it very, very well.
Right.
And that's what it comes down to. And so we've developed this course, self-defense course, starting next year. And this is not the intent of this is not, hey, it's a 3-hour day or a 12-hour workshop. It is an ongoing class that it works on a 8 weeks rotation, but the idea is that you would not be in and out. Is you stay consistent with this and you train month after month, year after year. Now, at a certain point, if you decide to transition into one of our specific martial arts,
cool,
great. If after 8 weeks you've learned something and want to move on, that's okay. But just have that warning that all technical abilities and skills will decay, so you need a way to refresh that.
Everything's perishable.
So Tuesdays and Thursdays at 7:30 p.m. You will be instructed by the many coaches here at Dragon Gym, but specifically Chris, Lonnie, and myself for this pilot program.
Not for nothing. You're going to get in shape. You're going to meet some really cool people, and you're going to have a lot of fun as well. You know, it's part of the learning environment that we have here. We're serious. We train hard. But at some point, we understand that people want to have a level of fun when they come and do this.
Absolutely.
So that's something that you're going to experience.
So registration is opening this week. This class is going to, I know how many people are on the waiting list. This class is going to fill up quickly. Send me an email directly and you can get on the waiting list.
Let's do it. It was fun.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, guys.